Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Maddy Dyment, and I'm going to be your host. Personally, I am a University of Florida first-year graduate student, and I'm here on behalf of Streaming Science. And so I am here with a crew of other University of Florida graduate and undergraduate students who are helping to bring this experience to you live. Just a little bit about us. Streaming Science is a college student-driven project that really has the goal to increase science literacy among middle and high school students and teachers. And so we thank you for being part of these groups who are coming to learn more about exciting scientific topics and news. And so at any time, we would love if you all would let us know who you are in the chat, what school you're from, what grade you're in. This is a really interactive experience, and so we love to have all of your feedback. But today, for our topic, which is called From the Ground Up, we are here at the North Florida Research and Education Center to learn a bit about soil, peanuts, and who knows what else. And so I'm here today with Jay Capasso and Kelly Ah. And so if you all want to go ahead, we'll start with you, Jay. You can introduce yourself.
Hey everybody, I'm Jay Capasso. I'm the Row Crop Agent in Columbia County, and that's a county up here in North Florida. And I work with a lot of growers, and I help advise them on crop health issues. And I work with watermelon growers, peanut growers, and field corn growers mostly.
And I'm Kelly Ah. I'm the Suwannee River Partnership Outreach Coordinator, and I'm based here at the North Florida Research and Education Center, Suwannee Valley, here in Live Oak, Florida.
Awesome, thank you both. So if you want to go ahead, Jay, you mentioned that you're an extension agent here. If you want to go ahead and just kind of let us know a little bit about what extension is and what sorts of things you do as an extension agent.
Yeah, so every single state in the country has a school called a land-grant university. And this school will study agriculture and do research on agriculture. And it's important that they have extension agents like me who get some of that research that happens at the university out to the farmers. So I interact with farmers in my county, and I'm the eyes and ears of the University of Florida when it comes to issues happening on farm. Sometimes I need to communicate to the researchers about the issues that are happening on farm that they need to research. So it's making sure that knowledge comes from the university and gets out to our stakeholders and our farmers.
Awesome. So it's really kind of like bridging that gap between the academic context of agriculture and the people who are actually putting it into practice.
Exactly.
Awesome. And Kelly, if you want to go ahead and tell us maybe a little bit more about the North Florida Research and Education Center, kind of what you all do here, that type of thing.
Yeah, so we are a 400-acre research farm, and we work with extension agents like Jay on different research projects that are happening here. We do a lot of things from corn to peanuts, watermelons, tomatoes, kind of anything you can think of that can be grown in North Florida. We do a little bit of research on that. We got about $30 million coming in through this research center just for research projects. And our main bread and butter is a little bit more with water quality and quantity, just because that's a hot topic here in the state of Florida.
Awesome. I just have a really quick question just for my personal interest. What is your favorite crop that you all grow here?
I really like our tomato berries in our greenhouse, but a lot of my job has to do with corn because it takes up a lot of nitrogen, and so corn is actually kind of a very fascinating crop. It can be grown anywhere, and so I do a lot of work with corn. I really enjoy it.
Well, you mentioned nitrogen, and that is something to keep in mind because we're going to be learning a little bit more about nitrogen and some of its purposes a little bit later on in the field trip. But I think first, Jay, what we had in mind is you kind of just taking us from the very foundation of what all of this is about, which is soil. So if you all want to come over here with our crew, we're going to move over to this table to talk a bit about soil and some of the different layers of soil and what it all means.
So I would love to talk to you guys about soil. I have my master's in soil science from the University of Florida. We'll move the flip book over here. And I want to show you what a typical soil looks like in the United States. You have a mineral material of soil. This is sand, silt, or clay. And these are different particles, basically, of small little rocks that have degraded over time. You have organic matter. Organic matter is basically dead things that were living. So blades of grass that have decomposed, leaves that have fallen off the trees and decomposed into the soil, dead animals, and manure as well. So that's the organic portion of the soil. In the United States, generally the organic matter content in the soil is somewhere around 5%. But in Florida, we're closer to 1%. And that's because we have very sandy soils and we have a warmer climate. For you students that are up in Canada, you're probably looking at more of like a 5% organic matter because your ground's frozen over maybe 4 months out of the year. So there's less microbes degrading the organic matter, and we'll get to that soon. Soils also fluctuate between their water and their air. So there's a good amount of air that's in the soil and water, and that kind of depends on whether it just rained. So it looks like 20 or to 30% water and air content in the soil. And this is a picture of a soil that we dug up here today at the North Florida Research and Education Center, Suwannee Valley. And you can see the different colors of the soil. On the top, you have a darker color. And then as you move through the soil, you start to have a lighter color and almost kind of like a orangey kind of lighter color as well. And what's happening on the top of the soil, the reason you see a darker color is because that's where the organic material accumulates on the top of the soil. We dug this out of a sorghum field, but over time, grass and roots and residue from row crops have accumulated here, and they've made the top of this soil dark. And then at the bottom of the soil, you see different colors because iron and clay type kind of material has accumulated down here. So to understand soil, it's really important that you understand soil texture. And I'm going to get to that next. And this is a picture to help you understand soil texture. So you see sand. I know sand is basically a particle that looks something like this, where you can see a single grain of sand. It's a fairly big particle for the soil. When it comes to silt, which is a smaller particle, only some of us can see a single particle of silt. People have really eaten their carrots. But clay, a single particle of clay, nobody could see. That's microscopic, basically, at this scale. So you can see that sand is a bigger particle, followed by silt, and then clay. And that changes the way that the soil will interact. Soils that have more clay in it will typically have more organic material, and they'll typically hold water a little bit better than a sandy soil like here in Florida. And since we have such a sandy soil, this is why we see different colors in the soil with different materials such as clays accumulating further down. And I was kind of surprised when I dug this up today because I expected to see, like I do over in Columbia County, very bright kind of clay color. But we did not see that here, and I think that's because basically the geology of this area. And a lot of Florida is an ancient shoreline, and over time, that during the last kind of interglacial period, we had probably a shoreline that wiped away that clay material down here. So we don't have that clay material further down, at least that bright red clay material that I expected to see. It's kind of a lighter coating. So now I'm going to move over here, and I'm going to show you kind of the process of taking a soil sample with my soil auger. So this is my soil auger, and this is how I took my sample today. You just want to hold this for me for 1 second. And you can see on the top of the soil that you have grass blades. And this is where that darker color was on the top of my soil profile over there. And this is where a lot of what's going into the soil, the organic material, kind of starts up here on the top of the soil. Let's go down. We're going to get the first 6 inches or so. I'm going to hit it out with my auger. And we'll go this way so you guys can see it. You see some of the darker type kind of soil here. And soils do a lot for us. This soil provides nutrients. If you guys have ever seen a fertilizer bag, you see nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium on the fertilizer bag. Soils have nutrients like that in them. And they have other nutrients like micronutrients that crops need in lesser quantities as well. Another thing soils do for us is that they hold water. So it hasn't rained in a few days, in probably over a week here. I'm going to feel the soil and see how wet it is. And it's still pretty dry. And that's because we've been through a very dry period, but soils will actually hold on to water longer than you would think. So a very important thing that soils do for us is their water holding capacity. Soils also will provide support for plants to grow. So soils physically support everything from plants to skyscrapers. And you see some of the color there. As we keep going, I'm expecting that we'll see a little bit of a lighter color as we saw over in the soil profile over there. And you can see how deep I can go. I'm kind of trying to get to 12 inches now. I'm stuck on something, I'm sorry. I'm kind of getting below the root zone, and it's hard to go through the root zone.
Yeah, I'm sure it's pretty difficult to dig that far deep.
It is. So let's see, we're getting down to about 12 inches now. Let's see if we start to see a little bit of a different color in the soil. All right, we still have more or less the same color. I'm thinking if we go down a couple more times, we might start to see a little bit of a lighter color like we saw in the soil profile.
So Jay, I'm curious, what is the importance of some of these different soil levels? Do they have certain purposes that are different from one another?
Yeah, so the soil kind of horizons is what we call them in the soil when we see different colors in the soil. So that darker color on top would be a zone where organic material is accumulating in the soil. That's really important for plants to grow and have different nutrients. And then if we start to see a lighter color here, what we would see is basically an area of the soil where there's less accumulation and more area of the soil where water has been moving in through for millions of years and kind of stripping or getting rid of some of the material that's in it. So we're starting to see a slightly lighter soil here. And if you think about rainwater, which is slightly acidic, it's moved through the soil for millions of years, it'll start to affect what the color of the soil looks like and the different type of nutrients that are bound onto that soil. So let's see if this looks any lighter. I think it's beginning to look a little lighter. I don't know if it's going to show up on the camera or not. But when we talk about soil health, a really important component of that is the organic material that I've been speaking about. Mm-hmm. Organic material is basically, dead living material that's decomposing, but there's a biological component of soils, there's a chemical component of soils, and a physical component of soils when it comes to supporting plant growth. And the biological component has to do with the microbes that live in the soil, many of which are beneficial for plant growth. The chemical component has to do with the nutrients that help to support plant growth, kind of like nitrogen, what we'll be speaking about today. And then also the physical component of soils. Soils that have a lot of organic material in them that are healthy can hold a lot of water. And that's really helpful during drought situations.
Absolutely. So I think that you all have been receiving a lot of information so far, but I'm wondering if there are any questions from our students who would maybe like to have some answers coming to them live from Jay. So I'm going to go over actually to Marissa, who is part of our lovely crew here. Marissa, do you have some of our student questions here for us?
I sure do. Thank you for Rock Hill Virtual Academy High School from Rock Hill, South Carolina. We've got a few questions for you, Jay. All right. First off, what safety precautions should students follow when collecting soil samples?
Well, you should always wash your hands after you collect soil samples, and you should always be careful if you're taking a soil sample out in kind of a residential area where there may be lines that go underneath the soil, like electrical lines or other type kind of material underneath the soil that you don't know about.
Great, great. And do you mark the different locations from which you collect the soil samples?
I often do, yes.
Okay. Another question we've got from our great listeners is how much water is needed for the soil? Is there a certain amount of rain per month needed? And when would you use hoses to make up for a water deficit?
So it depends on the crop. Different crops need different amounts of irrigation, and it depends on whether it just rained or not. Sometimes crops can get by on the rainwater that we get, especially during the summer months here in Florida. But there are other periods of time where we need some irrigation so that crops can grow. So it all depends on the crop and how much water it needs. For example, in this area, corn needs a little bit more water than peanuts do. So the different crops just have different demands.
Great. So how can you tell if soil has gone bad or is not usable for plants?
So one way is to take a soil sample, and you can find out different information from a soil sample. You can find out the pH of your soil. That's really important. Some of you maybe have taken a pH of your fish tank at home, and for most crops, we want a pH of somewhere around 6.5, and that's just slightly under neutral pH. pHs range from 0 to 14, and most crops like about a 6.5 pH, but there are some exceptions, like blueberries that like a very acidic pH, which would be a low pH. So they might like a pH closer to 4.5.
All right, and we'll wrap it up with one more question, kind of a generalized question from the group. What are the requirements to become a soil expert? And is there a specific college you'd have to attend to learn or major in soil? Does it have to be an agricultural school?
So most soil programs are in agricultural schools or land-grant universities. Every single state has a land-grant university. We just got a question from South Carolina, and Clemson would be one of the land-grant universities in South Carolina. In Florida, that would be the University of Florida. So those schools tend to have soil programs, and they focus on agriculture, but not just agriculture. They may focus on environmental science as well. So focusing on different nutrients and pollutants that might be in the soil.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jay. We really appreciate you letting us know a bit more about soil. And so I had mentioned before to remember the terms like nitrogen, because we're going to be talking a bit more about them today. So we have a presentation coming up from Dr. Sudeep Sidhu, and he is one of the lead researchers and extension people here at the North Florida Research and Education Center in Suwannee Valley. So you're going to be hearing different terms like nitrogen and nitrate leaching, which I even have to look up sometimes because even though I've been in school for a while, they still are a bit difficult to wrap my head around. But thankfully, we have other experts here who can really help us kind of dive into what these things mean and make it a bit more clear for you all. So Kelly, if you want to go ahead and let us know a bit about what some of these terms mean and some of the things that we can expect to be learning about.
Yeah, so Sudeep is actually our water resource agent here at the center, and so he does a lot of research on water and soil health because of that. And so nitrogen is just one of the nutrients that plants need to take up. Corn uses a lot of nitrogen. It's just something that it really loves to take up, and it utilizes it to help grow bigger and stronger. And then we also have nitrate leaching, which is just nitrogen basically going down through the soil into the aquifer. And so those are very important hot topics here in the state of Florida. In North Florida, you'll hear a lot about nitrogen leaching, whereas in South Florida, the big hot topic is phosphorus leaching.
Awesome. Well, keep those ideas in mind as we now transition over to our video with Dr. Sudeep Sidhu.
Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Sudeep Sidhu. I'm a regional specialized agent in agricultural water management, and I work here at North Florida Research and Education Center in Suwannee Valley. Most of my research is focused on water quality and water resources. Water quality at this point is one of the prominent issues in agriculture here in Suwannee Valley where we are, and as well as at least in the whole part, the northern part of Florida. So most of my research efforts are focused on water quality, which indirectly relates to nitrate leaching. So for those of you who are unaware of nitrate leaching, nitrogen is one of the major food components for plants, and not all the plants take nitrogen as nitrogen. So some of the plants take nitrogen as nitrates, and some of the plants take nitrogen or uptake nitrogen as ammonium. So, or ammonia in the ammonium form. So it's kind of like, you know, if you like chicken, for example, if you have fried chicken versus baked chicken. So, but most of the row crops that we have here in Florida, they uptake nitrogen in the form of nitrate. Now the question would be that why is nitrate important? It is because nitrate is very soluble in water. So every time there is a rainfall event or we irrigate our crops, every time water comes into contact with the nitrogen fertilizer, which now is in form of nitrate because that's how the plants uptake it, the nitrates get dissolved into water, and due to our deep sandy soils here in state of Florida, the water moves down or percolates down the soil profile very quickly, and with that water, all the remaining nitrates that are still in the soil and haven't been uptaken by the plants. So that's why when all those nitrates that are not utilized by the plants go below the root zone, because once the nitrates pass below the root zone, there is nothing stopping them because now the plants are not uptaking any nitrates. So those nitrates easily go to our water table. And then excess of nitrate concentration in our waters is causing the water quality issue. So the big question is that why do we even care about nitrogen moving down the soil profile? And we care for that because all that excess nitrogen that reaches our water, groundwater, that water ends up being in our springs, in our rivers, and that excess nitrogen is toxic. It is toxic to our sea animals. It's toxic even to humans at certain point if the concentration of nitrogen in those waters is higher than a particular level. That's why we care so much for nitrogen reaching down the soil profile, and we are working to come up with different ways to quantify how much nitrogen we are able to save from moving down the soil profile, and this project with the use of grain gauges is helping us improve our knowledge about it. So the next question in your mind would be, what is a lysimeter? There are different kinds of lysimeters. There are certain small lysimeters. They are called suction cup lysimeters. These are the big lysimeters called the drain gauge lysimeters. A lysimeter in itself is just a reservoir that is able to capture the moving water that's moving down your soil profile. An equipment that is able to capture that water is called a lysimeter in very simple terms. And based on what purpose you are using that lysimeter is for, you can either use a suction cup lysimeter, which is a small piece of equipment, or you can end up using the drain gauge, which provides us a lot of flexibility in terms of data collection.
All right. Well, we hope that you all enjoyed that video from Dr. Sudeep. Just kind of as a quick recap here, before we go to our student questions, Kelly, do you mind telling us a little bit more about why nitrates can negatively impact the water quality?
Yeah, so it's kind of a trickle-down effect if you think about it. So water leaches through or trickles down through the soil profile, and it can go into an aquifer, which then goes out into our springs and rivers. And if the nitrogen is a little too high in those areas, it can create a lot of algae, and algae that covers over a large area blocks out sunlight where underwater vegetation can grow. And what eats underwater vegetation? You have manatees, turtles, fish. And so it all kind of has a cyclical effect. It all trickles down. And so it's very important to try to watch how much nitrogen we have go in. And of course, the higher the nitrogen is, you can't drink it. And so it's very important to try to keep that maintained.
Yeah, so that's a massive impact actually that can really go on to affect like just a lot of different aspects of life. Wow, that's crazy. Little things that you wouldn't really think of. But now I think we can take this opportunity to turn to you guys back at home to take some of your questions and have Kelly here to answer our questions for you. So we're going to turn again to Marissa.
Thank you very much, Maddie. All right, Kelly, one question. What's the number one thing people should know about nitrogen?
I mean, the number one thing that you need to know about is that plants need it. It's not something that you can take away. All plants need nitrogen to grow, and so that's a very important. We have to have nitrogen. We just have to manage it properly in order to help protect our water resources.
Great. Are there any misconceptions people have about nitrogen?
Yeah, I think a lot of people think that you can just not use it or you can just remove it completely from the system, and that's not realistic. In this area we grow a lot of corn. As I said, that corn is a hot topic, an issue here because it uses so much nitrogen, but you have to have it. You can't not have it, otherwise you won't have a good crop.
Awesome. And at what amount or level of nitrogen in water supplies would our state or county have to inform us to not go into that water?
Ooh, that's a very good question. I think it's at 10 milliliters. I'm trying to remember exactly what it is. 0.35. Yes, they're trying to make it at 0.35. I think if it gets to a little bit higher than that, you can't drink it. Just in general, for you to understand, they're trying to reduce the 4 million pounds of nitrogen going into the soil profile right here in the Suwannee River Basin. So there's a lot of math that goes into it that the Florida Department of Environmental Protection has, and I don't know all that math, so but we're not at a level at any of our springs I'm aware of right now where we're at the critical level.
Thank you for that information. One final question to kind of wrap up the questions portion is, if someone wanted a job that you or Dr. Sidhu have, what would you study?
So I actually studied agriculture communications. A lot of my job is just communicating with other people about exactly what's going on in agriculture and in science and in our water resources. Sudeep actually got a degree in soil health. He actually graduated from his college in India, and then he went to the University of Georgia and to get his doctorate degree. And so he did study soil health at both of those. He went to a land-grant university, which here in the state of Florida we have FAMU, and we also have the University of Florida. So you can do, there's so many different things you can do. There's so many different departments that focus on water, on soil. So there's a lot of options out there for you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kelly, for all of those answers. I think that soil can sometimes be, you don't really think too much of it just on a day-to-day basis, but it impacts so much of our lives. And so it's really interesting to learn a lot of really in-depth information about it. But now we're here with Jay once again to learn a little bit more about peanuts and the process of peanut pod blasting, which, by the way, is as exciting as it sounds. So Jay, if you first want to just kind of introduce us to the idea of peanuts, maybe tell us where else they're grown other than Florida, obviously, and just kind of go through that for us.
Yeah, so peanuts are a legume plant, the same family of plants as beans and other plants like that, and they're grown in the southern part of the United States and across the world. But they're grown in warmer climates. For you students up in Canada, Canada unfortunately doesn't have a good climate for peanuts, but they're grown here in the southern parts of the United States. Georgia, our neighbors just to the north of here, which is probably about an hour or less away, where they grow the largest amount of peanuts out of all the states in the United States. After Georgia, it's often a competition between Florida and Alabama to be the second biggest producer in the United States. So we grow a lot of peanuts here in Florida. Some other states where they grow peanuts include South Carolina, North Carolina, and across the South, Alabama, Mississippi, all the way up to Tennessee and Virginia. And then they're also grown in Texas and grown out in Oklahoma as well, in New Mexico.
Awesome. No, that's super cool. But firstly, I also do want to give a little shout out to our Canadian school because I am actually from Woodstock, Ontario, so I love to see the representation from up north. I couldn't continue without saying hi to you guys. It's nice to have you on board. But if you maybe want to talk to us, I know that you have your flip chart here. If you want to kind of go through maybe some of the different products that peanuts are used for, some of like it's a very popular thing, and so just kind of talking us through that idea.
Yeah, so some of the different products we use peanuts for include peanut butter. Most of the peanuts grown in this region are ground together to make peanut butter. They're also roasted or boiled down south in the southern parts of the United States. They like to boil their peanuts. You might see them at a baseball game where they're roasted. And they're also used for peanut oil as a cooking oil. I'm sorry, we're just having a little bit of wind here.
Yeah, it's a little windy.
If you guys have ever been into Five Guys, you'll know that first they've got roasted peanuts up front, so that's awesome. But they cook a lot of their food, hamburgers and fries, in peanut oil because it's a very tasty cooking oil.
And I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm really curious because I know that peanut allergies are a thing, but I heard somewhere that peanut oil actually isn't considered an allergen. Do you know anything about that?
I don't know anything about that.
Yeah.
But that's interesting if that's the case. Maybe it's a way that they process it.
I think it's the refinement. And so certain peanut oils are super well refined. And so anyway, they process, I guess, enough to where it's no longer an allergen.
That would make sense to me. And it's interesting. They're doing more research about peanut allergens, and they're finding that if you're exposed to peanuts at a very young age, when you're an infant, you're much, much less likely to develop a peanut allergy. And then last, I have to include a chocolate bar covered with peanuts in it, because I'm sure many of you had that this week with Halloween. So we're going to flip over the next page. And I want to talk about George Washington Carver briefly. George Washington Carver invented a lot of use for the peanuts, and he's also a scientist that studied peanuts. He was a professor at Tuskegee University, which I believe is in Alabama. And this was a man that was born into slavery in Missouri and went on to receive his master's degree from Iowa State. And he developed a lot of uses for the peanuts, and he studied peanut agriculture, and he worked with farmers in Alabama and just trying to get them to grow peanuts, because we grew a lot of cotton in the South. And since we grew cotton every single year and we didn't rotate it with different crops, so we didn't grow cotton one year and then another crop the next year, a lot of the pests that feed on cotton, such as the boll weevil, really built up. So he really helped to the southern economy, which is very rural and agriculture based. He really helped out the southern economy doing this research. And his claim to fame is that he addressed Congress about the different uses for peanuts. And he only had a certain amount of time to address Congress, but they kept on giving him more time to address Congress. Wow. So we'll go on to the next one. And you can see peanuts started out in South America. They actually made their way to Africa and the Old World before coming over to the United States, where they were grown. So that's why they grow better in warmer regions.
That makes sense.
And again, this is kind of what I spoke about earlier, the different states that grow peanuts. You can see that Georgia is the one that grows the most, but we're close behind, at least us in Alabama are behind them. And the next thing I want to talk about, we're going to talk about pod blasting peanuts, and you're probably wondering what that is. Well, that has to do with determining the maturity of peanuts. It's actually really hard to determine when to dig and harvest your peanuts. Peanuts grow underneath the ground. These pods here, they have a flower, and from the flower, a peg will come out, and they'll begin to grow the peanut underneath the ground. And since they grow underneath the ground, it's not like walking through an orange orchard where you can see when all your oranges are ready. You have to go out and you have to dig up the plants to see when all the peanuts are ready. And to make things even more difficult is that different peanuts on different plants mature at different times. So you see you have a young peanut right there, and then you have more mature peanuts right here. So it's not like corn or wheat, which are called determinate crops, that all mature at the same time evenly throughout a field. With peanuts, they mature at different rates throughout the field, so you can only harvest your peanut field when most of your peanuts are mature. You can never harvest it when all of them are mature at once. And the last thing I'm going to touch on really briefly is the different equipment that they use to harvest peanuts. This is a peanut digger. This is here at the Research Center, the North Florida Research and Education Center, Suwannee Valley. And you can see them, they're digging up the peanuts. They'll lay the peanuts on the ground for about 3 days or so to dry off. And then they'll come through and they'll combine the peanuts and separate the peanut pods from the vines. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to show you how I pod blast peanuts. And what I do is I take a pressure washer to the peanuts and I blow off the outer shell of the peanuts, and it exposes a color underneath. And I want to harvest my peanuts at a time when those colors of the peanuts are darker. So I'm trying to harvest at a time when most of my peanut pods are dark, and I'll show you how that process works. So I've got my peanut basket over here, and I have my pressure washer. this shoots out water very, very fast. So you always have to be safe about when we're doing this.
Do you want me to hold for you?
Sure. And you'll see the peanut begin to change color. This is what a typical peanut looks like that you might see at a baseball field or at Five Guys. And I'm going to show you what the peanuts look like after I take the pressure washer to them and blow off the outer shell. All right, so we're going to turn my pressure washer on. So what we see here, and it takes a little bit of time to really blow off the outer shell entirely, but you'll see that the colors have begun to change a little bit. You see I did a pretty good job on this one. You still see some of the outer shell on this one, but you can see the color underneath. And that's a brown color. So that's a good sign. That means that this peanut is nearing maturity and we're getting close to harvesting peanuts.
So basically what you're saying is the darker the peanut color, the more mature it is?
Exactly. And we can never harvest at a time when all of them look like this, but we can harvest at a time when most of them look like this. So when I tell my farmers to dig their peanuts, hopefully about 70% or so have this color peanut shell or even darker. They can get even black in color.
And I think you have some examples over here, actually.
I do, yes. So these have begun to dry out a little bit. I did these about an hour ago. I took the pressure washer to them and I used the pressure washer for a longer period of time, and you can see the different colors. So you have this brown color. This is a more mature peanut pod. And we want to harvest at a time when most of our peanuts are in this brown or black class. I use this peanut maturity board, which has the color of the white peanuts to yellow peanuts to kind of orange, kind of light brown peanuts to a darker brown to a black color. So you can see what that kind of brown color looks like, and you can see kind of what that yellow color looks like right here. So what I do is I go out to the fields of the farmers that I work with, and I'll sample 4 or 5 different plants, and then I'll pluck every single peanut pod off of each of those plants, and I'll take my pressure washer to them and I'll lay them out on this board. And this helps the farmers determine when to dig their peanuts. And the more information they have, the better peanut digging date or the better peanut harvesting date that they can select, and hopefully the more money they make. Because if they're harvesting at a time when most of their peanuts are dark brown or black, that means the peanuts weigh more, and that means they'll make more in their yield.
That is so cool. So Jay, I'm just curious, if anyone at home maybe is interested in, having a little peanut project in their own backyard, not the people in Canada apparently due to our soil quality, but is pod blasting something that they could do themselves?
It is. If you have just a small little plot, you may just want to take a knife to a peanut pod and, take so many peanut pods out of the field and just kind of take your knife and scrape off that outer shell to see what the color is underneath to determine when you want to harvest. And if you're gonna, down in the South, we like to boil our peanuts. Generally, we harvest those a little bit earlier than peanuts that are being dug for peanut butter and other purposes.
All right, just a personal question. What's your favorite way to eat peanuts?
I like boiled peanuts, and I am not from the South. I'm actually from Maine. But living down here, I've loved eating boiled peanuts.
You've been converted then.
I've been converted, yes.
Well, I think that we can go now and move on to some of your questions to see if Jake has some more answers for us. So we'll move over again to lovely Marissa.
Thank you, Maddie. And first we want to say thank you to Rock Hill Virtual Academy for all your questions today. So one of the questions we have for you, Jay, is what is done with those peanuts that aren't dark enough?
So some of the peanuts are never going to be quite mature enough. They're just harvested along with the rest of the peanuts. So you're just looking to harvest at a time when most of your peanuts are mature. That's how you'll make the most yield. So all the peanuts will be harvested from the field, but you're looking at a time when most of them are mature, if that makes sense.
Great. So that kind of also answers what happens to the peanuts if you don't pod blast them. But is there anything else we didn't cover today that you think students should know about the topics we covered today? Soil, water, nitrogen, and peanuts?
Well, I'd like to talk about peanuts in the terms of nitrogen, because you heard about corn needing a lot of nitrogen fertilizer. Peanuts don't need a lot of nitrogen fertilizer. And that's because peanuts are a legume plant, kind of like a bean, and they fix their own nitrogen. The air around me right now and around you is about 78% nitrogen, but it's in an inert form that plants cannot use and living beings cannot use, other than certain types of bacteria can fix nitrogen out of the air and provide it in a form that's available to plants. So peanuts can do that, so we don't have to provide them much nitrogen fertilizer. So it's a great crop for the environment as well.
Great. Thank you, Jay. One last question. Is there a way you can create a specific soil for a specific plant?
Well, different plants like different types of soils. Peanuts like well-drained soils, so our deep sandy soils up here in North Florida are good soils for growing peanuts. However, creating a different soil is pretty difficult, because if you think about an agricultural field, it's a very big area. So changing the soil that's in it is very difficult. But you can make different practices, such as using cover crops, applying organic amendments like compost to the field, and you can kind of change the amount of organic material that's in the field that way, and reducing the amount of disturbance in the field is also helpful. But if you're in a small area like a greenhouse, you can provide your own soil to different plant pots and grow plants in that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to both Jay and Kelly for giving us a really in-depth look into soil and peanuts and some of the different processes and things that we don't normally think about on a day-to-day basis. I do want to take this opportunity right now. I mentioned that I was here with my crew who are also University of Florida graduate and undergraduate students. And so I want everybody to meet Kayla, who has been our director today. She's the one who's been in charge of switching the images for you so that you get a really holistic look at everything that we've done behind the scenes to prepare this for you. You've already met Marissa, who has been handling our Q&A sessions. And then this is Caroline, who is actually one of our teaching assistants for this class. She was a host previously for another streaming science electronic field trip and did a fantastic job. And so she's been a real guiding force for all of us here. And then if we want to turn to our camera people, this is Annabelle. She's been one of our moving cameras because, as you'll notice here, a lot of our stuff that we do is actually done completely on iPads and using these mobile communication kits. And so we can take these pretty much wherever we need to, just so long as we have some internet and can upload things. And then finally, we have Maggie, who is our other camera person. And both of you have been doing such a phenomenal job. And so thank you for that. And then last but certainly not least, she does not want to be shown, but we have to show, this is Dr. Jamie Luizzo, who has been absolutely fantastic. She's been a real pioneer in the field of electronic field trips. And she's also the founder of Streaming Science and has done some phenomenal things. So thank you for giving us this opportunity.
Thank you for connecting with us today, everybody. Thank you so much.
And also, if you want more of what we do at Streaming Science, please feel free to visit our website at any time. We have podcasts, we have videos. We try to use a bunch of different multimedia platforms to really reach you all and to make it an interactive and immersive experience as much as possible. But thank you again to our hosts, and thank you to you all for taking the time out of your day and joining us. We hope that you learned a lot. We sure did over here. And so thank you, and have a